misapply them, because part of the learning is the struggle. And then ask your peers, like find your network who have already gone through that class, and so that you know where the bar is, because you obviously want to be above the bar. And then you've got to balance that intense achievement. And I will say, I have a love-hate relationship with the competitiveness, certainly in the Marshall School. I think it exists across the campus. You can't help but get away from messages about USC being number one. And I mean, even as a faculty member, I see faculty members getting this grant or that grant or whatever, is to figure out what is your personal well-being, like your personal care process or routine going to be, so that you can turn that off or turn the volume down on the work and say, all right, I need to give myself a breather, a break. And it can be any, I mean, even just looking at the sky as you're walking across campus is kind of a well-being practice that's easy to do. You can do it every day. And just to keep you from getting, in that tailspin. I had a story once, at a student, a freshman, who just happened to, for some reason, the first day of class came in and sat down, with other students, and then came up after, or came into office hours in the next week or two, and he said, I don't know if I'm in the right class. And I said, why? He said, well, I sat down and one person over here is saying how they started a company this summer and this, that, and the other one had an internship at EY. And, and he's just a freshman going, I'm just what? I should be doing those things. I've already should be doing those things. And I said, wait, these guys are like juniors and, sophomore, that was their sophomore or their junior internship. The other, we admit a lot of entrepreneurs, but you don't have to be an entrepreneur. You be what you want to be. And it gave him, just to say, and I felt so bad because I'm like, next time I'm going to put you somewhere else with all the first years that haven't done anything. So you recognize, back to what I said, everybody's unique, but everybody's still starting. So, so that's, I guess one of the things I'm like, don't believe everything you hear. But find out what that standard is and take care of, find your well-being routine.
Yeah, thank you. And I love also the well-being as well as the academic perspective, because I think it's really important to balance both. And we may talk about that a little bit more later on as well, but I think those are really, really good sort of actionable advice for that. So part two of this question, and you mentioned also the different standards in university versus high school. So a lot of our students may need to adjust their standards for themselves in terms of academic performance a little bit as well in order to meet those, because university is sort of a uniquely rigorous academic experience. So do you have any advice for those students who have always been high achievers, but might need to get used to that new high standard? Maybe they receive their first B, or maybe they get a grade on their first assignment that they weren't quite expecting. So do you have any advice for those students to in that type of situation? And then maybe we'll return to the order from the first question, so we can kind of give each of you a turn to start and finish on these. So that'll be right back to you, Professor Tolan, if you don't mind.
Well, and we can volunteer too, Connor. If
absolutely, thank you.
So
yeah,
I'll invite my panelists to just volunteer. One thing I was going to say is go meet your professors. If you get a B or you get a grade and you don't understand how or why or what happened, remember, they're not your parents, right? They're not going to get mad at you. And they're here to help you understand. And so that's my kind of one piece of advice is to get that feedback, like Professor Erol said, that fail but learn from that failure. You don't have to fail. A B is not an F, and you can always recover. I'm the eternal optimist with students, and I claim that and tell them, don't count totally on me, but there's always hope when there is hope. If the A is not possible, the A minus might be. But that, I would say definitely, finding that standard, but meeting with your professor and, or the TA, whoever's available to you, to sit down and go through. And if you're, I will say too, with TAs, because I have students who've come and said, well, I sat down with a TA, but they didn't, it wasn't clear. Don't be afraid to go to the professor, because usually that's the process. Go review it with the TA first, and then you can go to the professor. Don't feel like you're intruding on their time. That's what we're here for.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Professor Erol, if you don't mind going again next.
Yeah, I would have said exactly that. So I'm repeating Professor Tolan's words, but if I can add only one more thing, sometimes more often than not, you'll see in your syllabi when you're introducing yourself to to the classes that you take, that most of your professors will have factored in some sort of a crescendo of assignments that starts with low stakes assignments that are there to teach you, that are there to give you the space to fail when the stakes are lower. So take advantage of those as well. And then of course, understand if you fall short of anything, any standard, what exactly is that and how exactly can that be remedied?
Yeah, I don't know that I have much new to add to that. I think I really enjoyed Professor Tolan's. I never really thought about it that way, but about the professor is not your parent. But that's so true. And I like I said, never clicked until now. But yeah, if a student is not doing well in the class, they may be reluctant to go to their professor to talk about it because we're quote unquote the adult in the room, and they might be worried that we're going to be mad at them or berate them in some way, but that's not how it works. And if a student comes and is wanting to do better in the class, it's literally our job to help them. And so I don't, yeah, that could be better communicated. And thank you for pointing it out. Yeah, and I think that also Professor Erol's statement about humility is important too, because I know that everyone that's in part of this TSS society that we're talking to are generally very good students. And are used to doing well and getting A's. But college is a different animal, and you have to leave yourself time and space to learn how it works and learn how the pace works and find study strategies that work for you in this environment that may not be the same as the study strategies you used in high school. And if you don't do as well as you wanted in your first semester or your first year, that's kind of normal, and you have to give yourself that space and not beat yourself up about it, for sure.
Yes, definitely. And thank you very much for sharing. And you touched a little bit on something else I'll ask about as well, which is that a lot of our students are also looking for mentors here at USC, whether it's career or academic oriented. And, given that, as you all said, you're not parents, it's a very different role entirely. How do you recommend that our students go about the process of seeking out professors and getting in touch and beginning that mentorship process?
Shall I start that one?
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, I mean, in my experience, it's usually through classes, and it's usually through taking classes and speaking to the professors that you like, that you could see yourself working with in a mentorship capacity. And so, at least in math, it's common for students to ask about undergraduate research projects or things like that. And that almost always comes through a sort of word of mouth situation by a student talking to their professor, and their professor recommending some other faculty member that maybe the student doesn't know directly. So yeah, I guess it's not so different from putting yourself out there in the cafeteria, as we talked about earlier, and going and saying hello to someone or asking a classmate if they want to get coffee. It's really that kind of communication that you would have with a professor, which might seem strange to young freshmen coming in, that you would talk to your professor in that context, but it really is normal and it's fine.
Definitely. And if I might add as well, of course, as you said, just to echo, none of this happens if you don't step up and talk to the professor. And I'm talking to our students here. The professors are always there for you, and they can be extremely helpful and fantastic mentors, but you need to unlock that possibility. So anyway, thank you very much for sharing. And then Professor Erol, you're in the middle again, I'm sorry. But if you wouldn't mind going ahead as well.
Yeah, and exactly that. I'll add something in response to Audrey's question in the chat when that comes a little intimidating to some people, because it is a fact that it doesn't all come naturally to all of us. I've been there myself, so perhaps there's some value in not letting yourself not strategize at all. I mean, it's all right to strategize how to make these connections a little easier. I think perhaps this is a non-exhaustive list, of course, but perhaps keeping an eye on some of the events where groups of people are participating to kind of get your first vibe of a professor who's giving a talk might be a good way of familiarizing yourself. Some people's styles might work better for you. For some folks, it might be a little easier, a little less intimidating to do the initial interaction one-on-one, as opposed to in a group where you might feel that, oh, everybody's listening to me, even though that anxiety is lying to all of us. Nobody's listening to any of us. But if it does lie, whisper in your ears, perhaps to get that, just the familiarizing yourself with a professor during an office hours, or even just starting off with an email. I read this article by you and I was really captured by this idea. Could I ask you this question? I mean, that might break the ice.
Definitely. And sorry, just before you go, Professor Tolan, I realized that Audrey's question is actually very relevant to what our discussion here. So we can go ahead and answer that one now as well. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, it was perfect. Professors are people too. We get nervous talking to students just as students get nervous talking to us, but a student popped in just last week and he said to me, he goes, well, I like to make a point of sort of coming to office hours. I'm sorry, it's like the last week of class. And we actually talked for an hour and a half. He actually missed his shift at the ticket office as a student worker. He just went, oh my God. He looked at his phone and I'm like, okay, well, off you go. Like, not even bye, just go. But I think, just coming in, pick a professor you feel comfortable with. Okay, if you're nervous about this, you've got usually 4 or 5 professors or TAs, more if you have TAs. Pick someone you sort of feel like, oh, okay, they seem like, a kind person. They've talked about maybe how their kids. I happen to have a son who went to USC, so I will bring him up. He's now a little older than you guys, but especially when he was in this age group, I used him as an example for a lot of things. So, you try to find some kind of connection. I tell him how, he's a gamer, he's a video gamer. So people who like, oh, what game does he play? Or games does he play? So you can find that little connection. But just try it, and it takes practice. Okay, so pick somebody you think you can approach, and then you'll realize it's not that scary. The other thing with mentor programs, I was going to say, is you have an opportunity, regardless of what school you go to, there are probably a formal mentor program where you're at. So whether they match you up with alumni or older students, that's a formal mentor program, which you apply to and the like. Informal mentors are folks that you just ask advice of. And I think sometimes when we say, oh, I need mentors, that oftentimes, especially I find this with undergrads, oh, can you be my mentor? And even for me, that's a little daunting because we're unclear about like what the responsibility and accountability is. So just start your conversations with informational interviews. I mentioned in class, I was a consultant, I worked on Capitol Hill, did these other things. So people will come and say, how did you find that job? And then when I find out their interests, I will say, you know what? I have a former student who can, who you should connect with. And just those folks can be informal mentors to you, not just the professors, but the folks you do informational interview with. And if you kind of go back to them can I come back and talk to you more about this? Then they'll become more of a mentor without calling them a mentor. And so I think there's sort of those opportunities can be categorized a little differently. So I think that's what I wanted to say about mentors.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Can I add a little plug here? When
Absolutely.
I answer the question, I think I frame my answer more as sort of like undergraduate research and finding a mentor in that capacity. But it occurs to me, especially in the chat here, that there are many ways that you can have a mentor relationship. Like, what is this mentoring about? What kind of questions are we asking? And I don't want people to forget about their academic advisors too. And I think that students don't utilize their academic advisors as well as they could. And so if the question is just about like, what office on campus does this thing, then your academic advisors can answer those questions probably better than your professors can. And they're more easily accessible and probably less intimidating. So don't sleep on them either.
Academic and career advisors, by the way. Absolutely.
We're not intimidating.
Well,
That's the one thing we want to send you off with. Professors are not really intimidating.
Some might be a little bit more intimidating than these fantastic professors we have here with us today, but I agree. And I've never regretted talking to a professor whatsoever. And Josh, sorry, we'll get to your question in just a few minutes as well. But first, another common concern that we hear expressed from our TSS group is a certain anxiousness, a certain anxiety about finding their fit here at USC, especially among first-year students. And even among some of our first-year students who are finishing up their first year at USC, certainly among some of our first-year students who are going to be coming in the fall and the spring. So from a professor's perspective, what have you seen students do? What steps have you seen students take to sort of find their fit? And do you have any words of reassurance or guidance for those who might be finishing up their first year and feeling like, I don't necessarily know my place here? And maybe we can do a volunteer to start this round.
I can volunteer. This one's easy. Clubs.
Thank you.
Clubs. I mean, we have so many thousands of clubs. I have no idea how many clubs we have on campus. There's a club for every niche that you could want. And we have club fairs for new students coming in. That's such a great way to meet people and meet people outside of your, I don't want to use the word bubble here, but if you're in a certain major and you're going through your major requirements, then you're going to be in these classrooms with sort of the same group of people. And so, yeah, getting into a club that's sort of non-academic can really broaden the group of people that you're going to meet.
Well, okay, this is the sign language of Zoom. The clicking on and off of the mic is definitely clubs. I think too, your residential hall is, don't overlook the opportunity to, find folks in your residential hall and build relationships around that. And then athletics, just Connor, what do you call that? It's like intramural athletics. That's what they're called at SC. So, go, if you played basketball in high school, or, you don't have to play on the basketball team here, but you can go do a pickup game and find, folks in those areas. And I concur with Professor Tokorcheck, is that, see, I called you Paul before it because it's easier to say your first name. Is to get in the clubs that are both your passion, at, your interest outside your major, because there's a club here for dragon boats. There's a dragon boats club. And I think too, I will say, your cultural clubs. So we have Chinese students, we have Thai students, Taiwanese students organizations, Indian student organizations, Indian dance troops. So you can kind of find different pockets, but also break through, break out of some of those to get to know folks, that are a little different than you. I think that then, helps contribute to our cultural values here at SC, which is to honor diversity and inclusion, not just the fact that we've got folks from all over the world, but also that we're learning about them and learning to value each other and recognize we have a space for each other. and keep trying. I know it's a big school. But you know, so just keep trying. It'll happen.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I'm going to Google what dragon boating is because I have no idea.